begin in Lebanon, where at least 8 people have been killed, dozens more injured after the Israeli military said it carried out a targeted strike on the capital, Beirut. Reports on the ground say the Israeli airstrikes targeted Hezbollah's operations commander, Ibrahim Akil. Akil has been identified as one of the people killed in today's strikes. In 2019, he was designated as a terrorist, and last year, the U.S. State Department put out a $7 million reward for information leading to his identification, location, arrest, and conviction. Today's attack, however, is the third by Israel on Beirut this year. It comes amid the latest cross-border exchange of fire, with Hezbollah launching more than 100 rockets into Israel today. The Israel Defense Forces confirms around 140 rockets have been launched at northern Israel so far today. Air defenses intercepted some 120 launches, which were fired at the occupied Golan Heights, Safed, and Upper Galilee areas. Around 20 more rockets were fired at Meron and Netwa. Most fell on open areas, and no injuries were reported from these attacks. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, through his spokesperson Stefan Dujarric, has called on all members of the Security Council to exert a positive influence in promoting the easing of tensions between Lebanon and Israel. His call was in response to the escalating crisis along the Lebanon-Israel border. Tensions along the border have escalated since October 8, 2023, when Hezbollah launched rockets into Israel in solidarity with Hamas the previous day. Israel retaliated with heavy artillery fire towards southern Lebanon. The Israel-Hezbollah tensions have grown even worse after the deadly back-to-back attacks this week, targeting Hezbollah members in Lebanon, with pages simultaneously exploding across the country on Tuesday, then walkie-talkies detonating in a similar fashion on Wednesday. Hezbollah has blamed Israel for the attacks, while Israel has made no response to the charge.
The Secretary General and senior staff, and especially colleagues on the ground, have been following the situation very closely in terms of what developments in South Lebanon and in northern Israel. Our special coordinator for Lebanon, Janine Hennis-Plechacht, has been in constant contact with all concerned actors to urge for restraint and calm, as well as to support diplomatic efforts to end this cycle of violence urgently. We continue to urge the parties to recommit to the full implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701 and return to a cessation of hostilities to restore stability. It is important that member states also exercise a positive influence on moving towards de-escalation.
Leaders are also wading into the recent attacks by both Israel and Lebanon. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy has called for the immediate ceasefire between the two. His concern also extends to British nationals living in the country, whom he is imploring to leave now while they still can catch commercial flights.
I've just come from a meeting with my US, French, German and Italian counterpart. We of course discussed the situation in Lebanon, which is of huge concern at this time, and all of us are monitoring it very closely, and we are all very, very clear that we want to see a negotiated political settlement so that Israelis can return to their homes in northern Israel, and indeed Lebanese can return to their homes. And that's why tonight I'm calling for an immediate ceasefire from both sides so that we can get to that settlement, that political settlement that's required.
To the U.S. now, the government has said there are no changes to U.S. military posture in the Middle East. Pentagon spokesperson Sabrina Singh said at a press briefing Thursday night she's not tracking any force posture changes in the Eastern Med or in the Central Command area of responsibility. Israel has not directly commented on the attacks, which security forces say were probably carried out by its Mossad spy agency. Singh was pressed on the potential for a Gaza ceasefire deal amid escalating regional tensions and said Washington did not believe a deal was falling apart.
In terms of the attacks that you referenced, first and foremost, the U.S. was not involved in any way. So I don't have anything to add on these particular separate incidences that we've seen. Separately, we are always concerned about escalation. And that's something that you've seen us reiterate throughout the readouts that the Secretary has done with, whether it be Minister Gallant or with other leaders around the world. We're certainly concerned about escalation. We know regional tensions are high. That's why you've seen such a push from different officials across this administration to push forward on a ceasefire deal. We believe ultimately that the best way to lessen tensions in the region is through diplomatic means. And that's what the Secretary is working toward. Every call, the Secretary always reiterates the need we want to see regional tensions quell. And I'm not just talking about in the last few days. These are calls, from the very beginning. We've never wanted to see a wider regional conflict. That's why you've seen us surge different assets to the region at different times. We've had multiple carrier strike groups in the region. We had a carrier strike group in the Eastern Med. We have different capabilities there now. It's certainly something that's on the Secretary's mind. It's on the President's mind, and on this administration is working night and day to ensure that there is not a wider regional war. Yesterday, Secretary Austin spoke by phone with his Israeli counterpart, Minister of Defense Gallant, to review regional security developments and reiterate unwavering U.S. support for Israel in the face of threats from Iran, Lebanese Hezbollah, and Iran's other regional partners. The Secretary emphasized the U.S. commitment to deterring regional adversaries, de-escalating tensions across the region, and reaffirmed the priority of reaching a ceasefire deal that will bring home hostages held by Hamas, and an enduring diplomatic resolution to the conflict on the Israel-Lebanon border that will allow civilians on both sides to return home.
The VOA's Jacob Russell is in Beirut, Lebanon, from where he joins us. Jacob, great to see you. Could you tell us what you've seen? Could you tell us what you've seen and experienced over the last few days?
Yeah, the pager attacks that occurred this week, followed by the walkie-talkie attacks, have really plunged Beirut and Lebanon more widely into a state of quite extreme tension. And that is relative to the state of tension that it was already in, this conflict having gone on for almost a year at this point. Recently, during Nasrallah's speech yesterday, Israeli jets conducted very aggressive low-level passes, breaking the sound barrier several times over Beirut. The timing of this was clearly intended to send a message of intimidation, as it was timed to happen with the beginning of that speech. The speech itself was quite defiant. So really, yeah, we are witnessing quite a tense situation here.
What about today, with the airstrikes from Israel and the corresponding strikes from Lebanon? What has that been like for the people in Lebanon and for yourself who's on the ground?
Well, the strange thing is that, of course, these events can happen, and unless you are in some kind of proximity to them, you don't necessarily experience them firsthand. So to some degree, normal life continues in Beirut. But as I say, the people are living in a state of extreme tension, and they are at this point really expecting a more widespread war. They are expecting war to come to Beirut, and war has been in the south of the country for many, many months now. However, there has been at times a slightly surreal separation between the south and Beirut, whereby life can continue somewhat as normal in Beirut, and that is changing this week. That is changing. People are expecting direct conflict to come to the capital city, as it has today with the airstrike that killed Ibrahim Akil.
And when you say that people expecting, these airstrikes, people expecting a war from Israel, are they preparing for a war? Are they stocking up on supplies? Are they, making sure their bunkers are okay? What exactly are they doing in preparation for these imminent attacks?
There are no real bomb shelters in Lebanon. I'm sure there are a few for senior politicians and the like, but normal citizens don't have access to bomb shelters. People are making their own individual preparations, including myself. However, the Lebanese government is only actually a government in waiting, and it is not offering a great deal of support or information to the people of Lebanon. The health ministry is surprisingly resilient and has dealt with the extreme demands that have been placed on it this week better than you might have expected, considering the state of crisis that Lebanon has been in for several years. However, communication assistance from the rest of the government is quite lacking. People are really on their own.
That is a scary place to be in, Jacob. Are these attacks from Israel, are they indiscriminate, or are they targeted at certain infrastructure or facilities in Lebanon?
Well, that's an interesting question, because as we saw with the pager and the walkie-talkie attacks, you could argue that they were targeted in the sense that they were devices that were being carried by Hezbollah operatives. However, I think there is a distinction that needs to be made, which is often not made internationally, which is that Hezbollah has multiple wings. It has a military wing, of course, and then it has a civil society wing. So many of the people that were carrying these pagers were not combatants. They were not in an area of conflict. They were, as you saw in the CCTV footage that has been released, often shopping in markets, just traveling on the street. They were close to people who really had nothing to do with the conflict. A couple of children were killed because they happened to be close to these pagers when they exploded. So although Israel does claim that this is a targeted attack, and it's undoubtedly a sophisticated attack, I would say that they are stretching the definition of targeted with that. The airstrike that, excuse me, the airstrike that happened today, it was targeted in the sense that there was clearly some intelligence that the IDF had that there were senior members of Hezbollah in that building. However, that building is in a very densely populated residential neighborhood. It's not clear at the moment who exactly the casualties are, but undoubtedly some of the casualties will have been civilian.
It almost sounds like Gaza all over again, the situation that's currently going on in Gaza, where the Israeli IDF has been bombarding over the last few months, almost a year now. How difficult is it for you to get around Beirut? I know that, much of the attacks haven't really been on the capital, but people are wary about what's going to happen. I mean, there's a sense of fear on the ground, not knowing when the strikes will come, not knowing where they will be when these strikes occur, if they'll be able to get shelter and all of that. Has it affected, normal life, how people move around, the kinds of meetings they're having? And even, what preparations, what do they say when they go to bed at night, knowing or not whether they would be alive the next morning?
Well, I don't want to paint a picture that is that makes it appear that it's the same situation as what's happening in Gaza. What's happening in Gaza is on a different scale, and we don't know what will happen in the future in Lebanon. But currently, it's on a different scale. So during the day, the streets are definitely very quiet, partly because the Ministry of Health requests that people stay off the street to allow access for ambulances and emergency services to pass, and partly because, as you say, people are scared and they stay inside. There is also a psychological aspect of this, which is that Beirutis, as I say, have been living in a state of extreme tension for months and have been traumatized by especially the port explosion of 2020. This is an example of mass trauma of a population. So when Israeli jets break the sound barrier overhead, that would be scary in any city. In Beirut, there is an extra layer of re-traumatization that happens during those events. The people that live in neighborhoods where Hezbollah enjoy a support base and infrastructure and logistical bases, such as Dahir, the neighborhood that was hit today, they are undoubtedly living with reasonable fear of what might happen tonight, tomorrow. In other areas of the city, in areas which are populated by more generally Christian populations. There is a belief that they will be, at least for now, spared from direct bombardment. However, these situations are chaotic, frightening, and frankly, the capacity for error and mistake is great.
I understand the further instability that these heightened escalations between Israel and Lebanon brings to the Middle East, Lebanon responding with a barrage of rockets. What have Arab neighbors said about the recent escalation of attacks?
I would say that responses have been fairly muted. There are, of course, calls for calm, but they have been, as I say, muted responses. I think that there are different, it would be difficult to say that there was a unified response from other Arab states. There are, of course, different states which have different vested interests in the outcome of this conflict. But all in all, there are what you might say were the usual appeals for calm and restraint, but they do appear to be quite formulaic.
Jacob, thanks again for speaking with us, and do stay safe in Beirut.
Thank you.
We're following developments in Lebanon with more attacks by Israel on the country today. At least 8 people killed, dozens more injured in the attacks. But following the 2 waves of attacks on alleged Hezbollah members in Lebanon, 2 mysterious European businesses are coming into focus. The Deutsche Welle's correspondent Cassandra Sant is in Berlin with answers for us. Cassandra, eyes turned to a Taiwanese company initially. What do we know about that?
That's right. The pagers that exploded this week all had labels that indicated they were made by a Taiwanese company called Golden Apollo. But the company, in a statement, denied making these pagers, saying instead that a Hungarian company called BAC Consulting made the AR-924 pager models, and that BAC was licensed to produce and sell the models for certain regions, and that this was all handled by this Hungarian company. Now, Reuters also reports that the Taiwanese company added that there have been problems with remittances from BAC as well, with payments coming through the Middle East, even though BAC is based in Hungary in Eastern Europe.
Pretty interesting. So what is BAC Consulting, Cassandra?
Yeah, that really is the big question in Europe here at the moment, because this company seems to only exist on paper. Now, Deutsche Welle sent a reporter to the company's registered office in Bucharest this week, and no one answered when our colleague tried to ring the buzzer. There was, in fact, only one sign that the company even existed, and it was a flimsy paper notice that listed it along with about a half a dozen other companies on the front door of this building. BAC's website also now seems to be shut down. On top of this, another company, this time Bulgarian, seems to be involved. According to media reports, it was a company called Norta Global that supplied the pagers to Hezbollah, whose an armed wing, I should mention, is designated as a terrorist organization by several nations, including the U.S. and Germany. But this company, Norta Global, just like BAC, seems to have almost no footprint, and whose physical address is shared by 200 companies in Bulgaria's capital, Sofia. The New York Times has put all these dots together and is now reporting that BAC and 2 other companies were created as shell companies by Israeli intelligence in order to get these tampered-with pagers into the hands of alleged Hezbollah members.
Seems like we'll all be going down this rabbit hole. We might as well finish off about European leaders discussing this attack. We already heard from the British Foreign Minister. Who else has spoken about it?
The German foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, called for restraint on Thursday, writing on the social media platform X that she's warning, quote, all sides against further escalation. France has also warned against escalation, so has the U.S. The United Nations Secretary General has also said that they are deeply alarmed by the reports of the attacks and urged all actors to exercise maximum restraint. Meanwhile, Taiwanese and Bulgarian officials have also launched probes into the exploding devices. But It's important to emphasize that while 12 people were killed in that first attack, at least 3,000 people were injured. Additionally, there was a second attack on walkie-talkies on Wednesday, where 25 people have reported to have been killed. Over 600 were wounded, with explosions even happening at a funeral for someone killed in the first attack. The brand of walkie-talkie here appears to be a Japanese company, ICOM, but a representative of the company in the U.S. has told media outlets that the devices were not theirs and may be knockoffs. Many people in Lebanon are now scared about another wave of attacks.
I can imagine. Cassandra, thanks for bringing us up to speed on this from Berlin.